You know what I miss the most about the 80s? Scrunchies. Like, I feel like they're sort of making a comeback. Somehow a little bit, but it's going way too slow, and I really do think that scrunchies need to come back. Like, it should be a thing. So, yeah. This season made me happy. Scrunchies! Yay! Hi everybody, Carla here, and yes, I know I'm like 3 weeks late with this, but in my defense, I've been traveling. I thought I might be able to record something when I was back home, but it turns out I couldn't. You know, that's the problem of living with other people, that I just can't record in peace. But I'm back in my apartment now by myself, meaning I can record as much as my heart's desire. Yes, I'm going to do this. It's time for my review of Stranger Things Season 3. I know you guys have been waiting, so let's do this. First off, let's start with a warning. This is going to be spoilery. No duh. Obviously, I always have to like talk about everything, so there is going to be spoilers in this. If you haven't watched the season, number 1, what the hell is wrong with you? And number 2, watch it before coming here and watching this video. Because really, I will talk about everything, particularly the ending. So you guys have to be aware of this.
Danger, Will Robinson! Danger! No, Will Robinson! Danger!
Second of all, as you may imagine, this is going to be really freaking long. I'm just warning you from the beginning. It's going to be insanely long because I love this season. I have lots of thoughts about this season, you know, thoughts, and I need to like blur them all out. You know, like word vomit everything I've been thinking to myself for the entire time since I first watched it. I've already watched it 3 times, like the whole season 3 times, and every time I watch it I notice more stuff. So I have a lot of things to say, and it's going to be really long. So if you're not like in the mood to just sit here for hours and watching me talk about Stranger Things, I mean, that seems a little bit weird because it's basically all I do with my life. And if you're watching me, you should probably know this. But I don't know, maybe go like piecemeal, like maybe watch the first third of this video in one sitting, and then the second third, and then the last third. You can make it like a mini series because it's going to be really freaking long. Don't say I didn't warn you. I mean, guys, like I poured myself a glass of water because I know I'm gonna need it. I'm just gonna have it here just in case my voice starts to crack or something, because that usually happens when I speak too long. But yeah, I am prepared for this. Are you? Okay. So, as usual, when it comes to these reviews, I am going to start by talking about the production value and the, you know, effects. First off, like, it becomes really, as early as the first scene of the show, of the season, it becomes really clear that Stranger Things basically got, like, 90% of Netflix's budget for originals, because holy crap, I mean, they start off in Russia, you guys. Like, they built an underground Russian base. Like, can we talk about this? Like, that first scene, just with the machine spinning and then exploding, the key, and you know, Russians flying all over the place like in hazmat suits and then getting blown up to bits. Just that scene alone already set things up for this to be like ridiculous budget. Like, we knew this was gonna be a huge thing, right? So obviously they got a bump from last season, and it's funny because each season it has increased and increased and increased, and I like that because it also means that the show sort of becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and I like that. but at the same time they're trying very hard to keep it grounded in humanity. Like it's not like when people complain about superhero movies and say, oh, you know, the climax of the movie is just one big CGI fest where nothing seems like real, nothing seems grounded, and it just takes me out of everything. Stranger Things still feels grounded. It still feels like it's about the people, and it's still, even if you have these monsters there, they still very much feel like the people are actually fighting the monsters, like this is something that is actually happening. It doesn't just devolve into this giant CGI fest, even when it is CGI. And I think it's great because there's a sense of realism to it, and I really liked how they did that in this season. I mean, I don't think there were any special effects that really stood out to me. Everything looked pretty real. I mean, the monster, the rat monster, and then the giant spider monster, they all look really freaking creepy and really freaking terrifying. So yeah, I mean, if this is what they're gonna do with a huge budget, then I'm okay with it, because it didn't feel like this disembodied CGI thing that isn't quite there. It actually felt like it had a weight, it had a volume, it had a texture to it that made it, you know, feel actually real. And I like that. I really enjoy that. I think the effects on this show are flawless. And yes, of course, I mean, you can't, I've compared this show with big budget Marvel movies or, you know, DC movies or stuff like that before, in the sense that in the climax it's all this big CGI thing. And I really shouldn't compare because the budgets are like completely different. Like, even if Stranger Things does have a smaller budget compared to, say, an Avengers movie, I shouldn't really compare them, but it's very impressive what Stranger Things manages to do with a smaller budget compared to Avengers movies and DC movies, where I'm sitting there in the theater and thinking, they're fighting computer generated stuff, you know, minions that aren't really there. Stranger Things doesn't do that for me. Like, all the effects work really well, and I really find that very amazing, because you'd think as the budget goes up and up and up that they take advantage of that to make things like even bigger and even more surreal, and they do, but they make sure that it still feels like it, you know, it's people fighting these giant incredible things, you know, it's something that is actually happening. And you know, I have to congratulate them. They really did do their job right. I'm not entirely sure who it is that does the effects for Stranger Things, but they're doing a great job. And also, as far as we're talking about budget, as far as just set design goes, like, you know, the 80s has always been sort of an extra character to Stranger Things. Like, the 80s sensibilities and the 80s references and the 80s costumes and the 80s music, it all kind of works as a character on its own, and this season was no exception. But it really, really blew my mind that they basically 80fied an actual mall, like the entire mall. That's just ridiculous, you guys. Like, are you serious? This is the kind of stuff that you know, sound stages for. Why do you have to go to an actual mall and actually, like, make sure everything in it is like it was in the 80s? It's mind-blowing. Like, if that's how they're going to use their budget, I'm all in. That was amazing. And Starcourt Mall really did feel like an actual place in the 80s. Like, it felt like I remember malls in the US feeling when I was a kid. It felt like that. It was awesome. So my next point is the cinematography. I have to say, I feel like summer makes all the difference. In seasons 1 and 2, we really only got fall, like Hawkins in the fall, so it was always like fall colors and the palette was muted and stuff. They took this opportunity of setting the season in the summer to make sure everything was brighter and lighter and just more saturated. The colors were really, popping on your screen. And I really like that. It felt different initially, like when I was watching the trailers, it was a little bit like, it feels different from the other two seasons, but by the time the season actually rolled around and I was watching it, it was just great. And I remembered, as I started watching, I remembered that I had complained the previous season, like in season 2, which I liked season 2, but I did complain at one point that it felt like it was all very contained, like everything just happened inside places and there wasn't so much happening outside, which I thought felt different from season 1. This took that to the next level. Like, not only did they go back outside to things happening outside, but it was also an outside that was bright and colorful and energetic, and just there were more people there. Like, can you imagine how many extras they had in the mall? I actually read that in the companion book. I don't remember how many there were, but I remember someone saying that they had to do like 500 perms and stuff like that. Like, it felt like the town was lived in for the first time. I mean, we did see that kind of stuff like in the school and stuff, but this felt like an actual town where people go to the pool and then they go to the mall and they go to the fair, and it felt like even when they were protesting, it felt like the town was a real place with people and not just focusing on what was happening to the characters, in the middle of the forest or whatever. It really felt like they were part of a community, and I really, really like that. Like, seriously, summer just made all the difference, and I really love that. And I'm kind of worried now that they may be going back to fall in the next season, but necessarily because of timing, I guess, because they usually need like a year and a half to make these seasons actually happen. So that might just require like a fall, like a November type of date, of release date. And they do, Mike and 11 do mention Thanksgiving, so maybe that, or even Christmas, a point where they can actually all be in the same place at the same time. Now that Joyce has moved away and her family has moved away. So it worries me a little that I'm gonna miss that brightness and energy and just the whole colorful palette. But I don't know, I mean, I really do think it sort of became a character on its own this time around, which is really good. There were lots of just beautiful shots that I adored, like up at the hill. Every time the kids were at the hill looking down at the town, I really loved that. When they were going up the hill in the first episode to install the Cerebro antenna, they were really beautiful shots. Also at the fair, like I love the shots of people just having fun at the fair. I thought that was great. And speaking of cinematography, can we talk about the camera, the shift in the camera angle in that one scene with Nancy and Jonathan and Tom? Because I assume that's some kind of reference to some kind of like 70s or 80s like horror movie. I haven't watched many of those. Like I'm not a horror person, so if you talk to me about like Night of the Living Dead, all that kind of stuff just went right over my head, because I don't get those references. Or The Fly, I think, was also like some references that they actually put in there. I was thinking maybe like A Clockwork Orange or something. I don't actually know which movie it is that has that sudden angle shift for the camera. But whatever movie it was, or even if it wasn't a movie, it's freaking genius. I thought that was great. It felt very scary. Like, I didn't notice it the first time. Like, I watched that scene and then something happens and he kicks something and then the camera shifts, right? And I didn't notice it the first time around, and then all the angles were slanted, and I was just like, what just happened? So I went back and then I noticed him kicking and then the angle changing. I thought it was genius. Like, if they took that from an old movie, that's amazing. It's an amazing reference. If they actually came up with that on their own, they're freaking geniuses. Like, I thought that was fun. It was scary. It completely like went to the tone of that scene, especially since after that you would get like really close shots of Nancy and Jonathan, and then Tom was like standing up, so he looked farther away, and it was almost like a comic book, and I really like that, like a dark, gritty, I don't know, Dick Tracy type of noir comic book angling. And I thought that was fantastic. Like, I don't know if I should thank the Duffers for that or whoever the cinematographer is. I think it's Mr. Ives. Is he the cinematographer or is he the set designer? I don't remember. But I thought that was amazing. It's really going to stick in my mind now. And I hope they try more stuff like that, more angles like that. There were so many great angles, really, in this season that I thought the cinematography was just at its best, for sure. Now I'm going to talk about the splitting of the episodes and the pace of the season. And I have to start at the most obvious, and it is like even before you actually sit down to watch the thing, you can see the episode names, and you can see that some of the episodes names actually changed from what they had announced, I don't know, over a year ago now. So I found that super interesting because it's not rare. It happens pretty much every season. There's 1 or 2 episodes whose names get changed. But I think it's super interesting to analyze what changed and why, probably, and what might have happened. But there are 2 episodes whose names changed this time around. And first is that episode 5 was originally titled The Source, and it became The Flayed. And this change I actually really like, because the episode really was about the Flayed. It was about, the teens and the kids coming together and figuring out that this thing, the Mind Flayer that's taken over Billy is not just taking over Billy, it's actually taking over a bunch of different people. Mrs. Driscoll and Heather and Tom, and like that was the whole point of the episode. So I think that worked, and it also it gives a little bit of a Night of the Living Dead flavor to things. Already in episodes 3 and 4 you were kind of already getting that Night of the Living Dead flavor, but over in the Flayed, because you see a zombie movie, they're zombies, or they're like the infected, or they always have a name, so in Stranger Things they're the Flayed, and I think it really worked, and they're not actually zombies, which makes me feel better because I don't like zombie stories, generally speaking, but they managed to sort of hint at the idea of them being zombie-like without actually making them zombies. Like, they weren't crawling around whining for brains, you know what I mean? Like, they were compelled to do things, but they were actually still people. Some of them even talk to each other, like Heather and Billy. So I like that, and I like that they have a name. So the Flayed worked for me. On the other hand, the 6th episode was originally supposed to be called The Birthday, and it ended up being called E Pluribus Unum, which is, of course, I think one of the original mottos of the United States, which means from many one, basically. It's on the dollar bills and everything, so yeah, it's a big deal, and it's very recognizable, and obviously they chose to go with that because of the whole 4th of July feel to it, and it also kind of worked with the theme of the Flayed, because there's a hive mind, right? The Mind Flayer is a hive mind, so everybody who he flays ends up becoming sort of a part of him. So from many, one actually makes sense. I can understand why they changed the name, but honestly, I wish they had titled it The Source instead. Like, instead of episode 5 being the source, they should have made it episode 6 to be the source, because that's what the whole episode was about. Yeah, it from many, one sort of fits the whole, hive mind flayed theme, but there wasn't much of the hive mind in it, in that episode. The whole episode was about 11 trying to find the source inside Billy's head, right? So I almost, part of me, I get why they chose E Pluribus Unum, but part of me wishes they had just switched it with the source, because that would have, I wanted one episode to be named The Source. It's so ominous. I kind of love it. And I hate that it didn't go anywhere, that they didn't use that title. So yeah, that's it. It does make me really curious that the episode was originally going to be called The Birthday. Whose birthday? Was it Billy's birthday? Am I supposed to assume now that the whole thing with his mother and him surfing and going 7 feet and whatever, was that meant to be his birthday? Is that what that was about? Or was there a whole different birthday subplot for someone else that got scrapped? I think that's super interesting, and I would love to, obviously I'm never going to get to talk to the Duffers, but if I could, I think that's the main thing that I would ask them, because I'm really curious about this. Whose birthday was it? Was it Billy's? Was it supposed to be someone else? Was there a whole subplot in here that we just didn't get to see? What was it about? Are we going to see it later? I'm just super curious about this. So yeah, I had read reviews before I started watching, because the episode came out on a Thursday, right? So early Thursday, midnight Pacific time Thursday, which is around late afternoon, early evening for me down here. But of course I had work the next day, because I don't live in the United States, meaning I don't celebrate the 4th of July, so I still had work the next day. So I wasn't going to start watching it that night. I decided to wait until Friday night to start watching it, which is what I did. So I had been reading reviews prior, the whole week since the embargo lifted. I had been reading reviews, and I was aware that a lot of people had mentioned that the pacing was really breakneck this time around, in a good way. People were liking the pace. So when I got to Friday and I started watching it, the first 3 episodes I found pretty slow. And I mean, not that I didn't like them. I liked the first 3 episodes. I just was wondering what people meant by breakneck pace. It didn't feel like stuff was happening all that much. Nancy was investigating, basically, and Joyce was sort of starting to investigate, but the kids weren't in it yet, not really, until episode 3, when Max and Elle actually start looking for Heather. But even that went kind of slow. It went kind of nowhere, at least in that episode. So I thought that maybe people were exaggerating a little bit. I mean, again, not that I think that's wrong or anything. The setup works for me, but I thought maybe people were exaggerating. And then episode 4 happened, and my brain fucking exploded. Seriously, you guys, I don't know. I don't know how I sat through that whole episode. I was probably just sitting there the entire time, because that episode blew my fucking mind. it's like everything just started freaking happening all at the same time. And I didn't even know where to look anymore. Like, oh, this is happening. Oh, this is happening too. Oh, that's happening too. It's like, pfft. And I from that moment on, like, I remember, because you know how when you're binging through stuff, Netflix just keeps, like, you can just keep on watching, you know? Like, you don't really need to, like, stop and search for the next episode. Netflix just gives it to you. So I remember clicking play on the next episode, on episode 5, and then hitting pause, like 5 seconds in, and sitting there in my bed in the quiet of the night, because it was like past midnight at that point, I think, and just taking a deep breath, looking around my room and going, what just happened? Because I felt like I had run a marathon just from watching that episode. And to be fair, it didn't stop from that point on. Like, it just went on and on and on. And every episode there was a climax that made you gasp. Every episode seemed like a cliffhanger that just made you, like, immediately reach for the remote and hit next because you could not stop. And that was incredible. Like, there was so much stuff happening, so much action, yes, but also just discoveries, you know, like people figuring things out, and circumstances changing, and just abrupt twists that you weren't expecting. And it just, every single episode was boom, 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 boom. And it kind of like, okay, I really get it now. I get what you mean by breakneck pace. You should have specified that it was from episode 4 on, but yeah, sure, I get it. This season, I don't think I felt like that in any of the first 2 seasons. Like, yeah, I mean, you binge through it because you want to know what happens next, but there were always like softer moments, like slower moments in the episodes, and I didn't feel like that breathless, urgent need to freaking keep going because I need to know what's going to happen next, or I'm going to go insane. You know what I mean? Like, this really, and I think it has a lot to do with the summer setup again, but this one really felt like it was just going and going and going and going, and it felt like too much, but at the same time it didn't feel like too much either. Like, it didn't feel like they were just doing it on purpose. It felt organic. Like, it never felt like an action movie. It didn't feel like Die Hard. You know what I mean? Like, it still felt like the natural progression of things, but it just kept building and building and building and building, and obviously the end is like the biggest action scene we've had in the show so far. And I'm saying biggest in scale because I will mention it later, but there's one other action scene that I really liked, and I think it's probably the best action scene of the entire show so far. But the Battle of Starcourt was definitely the biggest, and just at a scale that we hadn't really seen before. So yeah, the pace. You mean like freaking flying through my brain the entire time? Like, every time I finished an episode, it was like, I need air. You know what I mean? It was amazing. And the fact that they managed to keep that going for like, what, 5 episodes straight in a row? Like, wow. They really know how to balance things, and the Duffers really do have a knack for knowing when to end an episode so that it makes a coherent sense in the episode itself, but it also propels you forward to the next one. And I really think that's, whew, I don't know, I just, every time I watch it, after I reach episode 4, I have to keep going. This is why I've watched it 3 times already, because I can't stop. So let's talk about plot lines. One of the things I love about Stranger Things, and this is kind of the reason why episode 8 of season 1 and episode 7 of season 1 and episode 8 of season 2 are my favorite episodes of those respective seasons. We always have a moment when when the characters, like all the different separate plot lines, because the Duffers usually separate the characters into different groups, right? And there's always a moment when all those plot lines sort of come together and they start sort of preparing for the climax. And I really like that, because I've always been more of a setup person than an actual like payoff person. Like, yeah, I enjoy watching the climax of the season. For example, like I like the Battle of Starcourt, but my favorite part of it is generally speaking the lead up to it. And that happened in season 1 and that happened in season 2. In season 3, when I was reading reviews, I was really happy to hear that all the plot lines for the different groups were going to converge again. But as I was watching, I was a little, I won't say disappointed. I wasn't disappointed, but it was a little miffed that while yes, the plot lines do eventually converge, it doesn't actually happen in one episode. It happens over several different episodes, really. So there's not one episode that I can point to that is like episode 7 of season 1 or episode 8 of season 2, where yeah, everything comes together and all the characters figure out what's going on together and they start preparing for the climax. So there's no one episode in there in this season where that happens. That said, there are episodes that sort of have parts of that in a way, and a part of it, apart from just plot lines converging, a part of it is also the characters coming together and figuring things out together and making plans and having those plans actually work. And you know, it happened in the first season with the whole bath thing with the pool in the middle school and whatever, the sensory deprivation pool, and it happened in season 2 with Will being a spy and everything, and them, you know, doing the session in Joyce's shed where they try to get information out of Will. Those are moments that I love, and they're usually a big part of why those episodes are generally my favorite episodes of the season. So there are episodes in season 3 that kind of have that feel to them, and for me, those were the best episodes of the season. I would say that's episode 4 and episode 5. That sort of feel like that, where plot lines are converging, maybe not all of them, but some of them are converging. And you have characters figuring things out, making plans based on what they've learned, and those plans actually working. And 4 and 5 for me were probably the strongest episodes of the season. But, you know, out of those 2 episodes, I think my favorite is episode 4, the sauna test. Yeah, I think 4 was probably my favorite because there is an element of plot lines converging. There's 5 separate plot lines happening over the season, like 5 separate groups that have to converge, and some of them are dealing with the supernatural side of things, and some of them are dealing with the political Russian Cold War side of things, right? So on the one hand, you have Elle and Max, who are trying to figure out what's going on with Billy and Heather. Then you have the boys, who figure out through Will that the Mind Flayer is still around, or at least it feels like the Mind Flayer is still around. And then you have Nancy and Jonathan, who are dealing with Mrs. Driscoll. So those are the supernatural side of things. And then you have the Russia side of things, where the Scoops Troop is obviously figuring out everything that's happening beneath Starcourt Mall. And then Joyce and Hopper, who are dealing with directly what the Russians are trying to do, rather than, the fact that there are Russians around, but what they're trying to do and the fact that they're trying to open a gate in Hawkins. So those are the 5 plot lines, and there is no point at which all 5 of them converge, but they start converging in episode 4, which I really love. Like that's the point where you see Max and Elle and the boys actually come together, and you can also kind of get a hint. I know that this doesn't happen until the next episode, but you can also start to see that Nancy and Jonathan's subplot is also going to converge. It doesn't actually converge until the next episode, but you can start to see it happening because you know that Nancy has seen this before, right? So you know it's gonna converge. You know it's going to happen. And part of what makes me really love this episode is that sense, again, that not only do these plot lines converge, but they start figuring things out, and they start making plans based on what they learned, and the plans actually work. And the sauna test I thought was freaking genius. I mean, I'm saying it again, Mike, my son, is a freaking genius, and everybody should listen to him, at least when it comes to, planning stuff, because he always seems to know what the fuck is going on, and he always seems to figure out how to fix it, or at least how to stop it as far as they can, I guess. Like, he always has plans. He always has a plan. He always comes up with a plan, and his plans generally work. So give Mike all the credit. I think he's great. I love that his plan actually worked. And yeah, okay, so like last time it was also his plan, and it didn't quite work because they hadn't taken into account the fact that the Mind Flayer might still be roaming around the earth somehow. But for a 14-year-old kid, it's pretty freaking genius what he pulls off in this episode. And I thought the entire sauna test, I remember when I first saw the episode names, and it was like the sauna test. What the fuck? What does that even mean? But when I saw the episode, it makes complete sense. Of course they would try to test if Billy is actually possessed by the Mind Flayer with a sauna, because he likes it cold. It makes complete sense. And I really, really love that. I love just seeing how the plot lines were converging. The sort of split screens between the sauna test happening and what was happening with Nancy at the hospital were really great. And I thought that was definitely going to let you know that these two plot lines were going to merge as well. But moreover, on top of that, I could say very similar things about episode 5, which I also really liked. But I think the sauna test is definitely my favorite this season, mainly because of everything that I already said, but also, I'm just more inclined to like the stuff happening with the kids, with the party. That's kind of my jam when it comes to Stranger Things, the party mainly. I know lots of people are super into the Scoops Troop, and I get it. I think they're awesome, but the party will always be my babies. So I like that they figured things out together, they made a plan, and the plan fucking worked like a charm. It was fantastic. It totally worked. But there are also aspects of this episode that I really loved that sort of put it above and beyond just that. And there are several things, for example, this is the episode where they have that scene with Karen and Nancy that was one of my favorite scenes of the entire season. I was so happy that Karen finally went back to being a mother again. I think they did her dirty in season 2, and I thought they were going the same way in season 3 with the whole Billy thing, which no. Why would you hoist Billy on that poor woman? I don't know. But they didn't, and they brought her back to being a mom, and I really love that. And it even sort of hinted at her background, and maybe her deciding that, you know, she doesn't have to take what the world tells her that she should be. You know, she doesn't have to settle. In telling Nancy not to settle, she was basically also telling herself not to settle. And I hope that means that maybe in season 4 we'll see more of Karen actually not being a mother, because I love that she's a mother, but and that she's there for her kids. It's what made me love her in the first place, but also maybe doing something for herself apart from her kids that doesn't involve being unfaithful. So yeah, I don't know, we'll talk about that later when I get to talk about Karen, but I just really love that scene. It brought me back to season 1 and the Karen that I loved in season 1. It was also like super feminist. Like I don't know if I've mentioned this. I don't think I've mentioned this before, but season 3 is basically the season of the girls and the women. Like this season was great all around for girls. Like Max and Elle sort of became super great friends, like, and they should have done that from the beginning. Like that should have been a thing from the beginning, because it made my life to just see them together and having fun together without the boys. I thought that was fantastic. Nancy asserted, you know, her determination to be someone, even though at the time, you know, women actually going out and doing amazing stuff was not kind of a thing. Karen had that one scene which I thought was fantastic, and Joyce like did not stop. The woman is a freaking bullet. Like she had some amazing moments right there in the season. And all the girls were just amazing, and I love that season for that reason. And this scene with Karen, I mean, not only does it sort of pass the Bechdel test, I guess, but it goes beyond. It really delivers a message of feminism, and not just one type of feminism, because Nancy and Karen aren't the same type of girl. Like they may not have the same priorities. Like Karen probably centers her feminism in her family, you know, in being a mother, while Nancy puts her career first. But they're both sort of feminists in their own way, and I really, really love that scene. So that's an added bonus for episode 4. But on top of that, just again, that last part, that last section of the episode with the sauna test, and then what was happening with Nancy in the hospital, just kind of blew my mind. The sauna test and the fight that ensued with Billy is the fight that I was mentioning earlier, that I think it's the best fight scene we've seen on the show so far. And it might not be the biggest, because it was contained to one room, and it was, you know, a bunch of kids and stuff fighting Billy, but it was so great. It was so well done. They knew exactly, you know, when the cues had to come up for something to just come up and change things, you know, and change the dynamic of the fight the way it was going. Like, you know, it first starts with Billy in the sauna, and then they realize that he's still activated, and he starts breaking out, and then 11 tries to push him back, and he grabs her by the neck, and you think, holy fuck, he's going to like kill her, and then Mike comes out of the blue and hits him in the head with a pipe. Like, fucking Mike became an action hero this season. I will talk more about this later, but freaking action hero. But then Billy turns around and then starts taking out on Mike, and then just when you think they're screwed, 11 somehow manages to get up and push Billy aside. And like every time something happens, then something else happens straight away that just changes the entire course of the scene. And I really love the confrontation with Billy. I think by far is the best action scene we've seen in this show. And don't get me wrong, I don't like Billy. Even this season was not enough to get me to like Billy. Like, okay, it's good to know a little bit about his background. I think that's great, but I don't like him. I don't think his background excuses any of the stuff that he's done. So I don't like Billy, but I think Dacre Montgomery was amazing in the scene. Like, freaking, oh my god, he was so good. And you know, I've been calling it since the Power Rangers movie came out, but he's so good. Dacre Montgomery is such a great actor, and the kids too, like, they did so well. This whole scene just kind of blew my mind. I keep telling you, after episode 4 was over, I just kind of sat there going, what the fuck just happened? Because my mind was like pouring out of my ears. I just loved it so much, and that was a feeling that carried me through the entire season, and that feeling started in episode 4. And for that, I think, for all of these reasons that I've just spent like half an hour enumerating, for all of these reasons, I just feel for sure that the sauna test, episode 4, was definitely my favorite episode of the season, and I think it's so great. I give Sean Levy all the credit. God knows I love him. I think he's so great. Like, you know, Stranger Things might be the Duffers' brainchild, but Sean Levy just brings his own thing to the show, and I love this episode. I love it so much. It was just so great. And unexpected, really, because of everything that I've told you, I kept waiting for the really big hit to happen, not yet. Like, I was waiting for it to happen at the end, toward the end of the season at least. And I wasn't expecting to be hit that hard at this point, and it hit me fucking back. Like, it punched me in the stomach, this episode. I thought it was amazing, and I really always love it for that. I do want to mention, before I move on to the characters, that one of the things that I love the most about this season in general is the continuity. And you're gonna tell me, Carla, you know, they're styling these seasons as sequels, so of course that there are continuity nods. But I think they did it better than usual this time around. Like, just little things, like, for example, when Max tells Elle that they're talking, and she says that maybe the reason that Billy could see Elle in the void was that, you know, that it's just a thing that happened because Mike was also able to feel her presence in the void once. Like, just that little hint as to what happened in season 2 had me perking up, like, whoa, okay, good. These are things that they're really taking into account. Or just the whole thing of how Will managed to figure out that the mind player was still around. Like, whenever he touched the back of his neck because he had goosebumps. That's straight from season 2, and I love that. So many little details, like, for example, just the idea that Elle can, by touching people in the void, can sort of absorb some of their thoughts and memories, like it happened in season 2. Like, I love that they're taking these little grains that they set up in season 2 that we didn't really think were going to go anywhere, and they use them to further the plot of season 3. I thought those were fantastic. So yeah, I have to give them kudos for that. I think the writing this time around felt more heavy. It felt more grounded in what they had set up in previous seasons, and I think that's really great. So let us talk about the characters and the acting now. I have to start with Mike because he's my favorite. So yeah, I think Finn Wolfhard is so great. He gets better and better every season, and there's nothing else I can say, really. I love that they give Mike, like, even though Mike doesn't have powers, and he's not like a policeman, and he's not like directly involved in in what's happening in the plot, except through Eleven and Will, basically. Like he's their third party, sort of. But I love that he's always the one that figures things out, and he's always the one that has a plan, you know. And it feels like he can see the forest for the trees more than all the other characters that just sort of focus on what's happening now. Mike kind of takes that and pans back and sees the whole picture, and I think that's great. I think it's good that they keep doing that with him, because it's a character trait of his by now, and I think it's great. I also, again, like I mentioned before, I know I joked when the posters came, the character posters came out, that Mike looked like he was standing in like an action hero kind of pose. He really did become an action hero this season. I mean, come on, he's this like little scrawny, you know, lanky, super geeky, you know, not at all, you know, athletic type guy, and somehow he managed to save 11 several times. Like, I can't even think how many. That there are probably several. Like, I only remember 2 at the moment off the top of my head, but like just during the sauna test in that one scene, I was, as Billy was choking Elle, I was sitting there thinking, oh my god, if he kills her, Mike is gonna be devastated. Like, can you imagine? You know, them having broken up, and then her ending up like dead or in the hospital or something. And I seriously thought, well, this is it, because like out of those kids, who's going to take on Billy? You know what I mean? Who's going to take on Billy? Mike is. You would never expect that. Just in a comparison of who Billy is and who Mike is, you would never expect Mike to take on Billy. But he fucking loves Elle, okay? He loves her. And he's going to fucking do whatever it takes to make sure that she's okay. Even if it means taking on Billy, who is obviously stronger than him and crazier than him and just more evil than him, and there's no way that Mike could ever beat him in a fight, but he's not going to let him, you know, hurt Elle. And he doesn't. And it was like I cheered when I think it's some kind of tube, or I don't know, maybe it's like a weight or something, like dumbbells. I don't know what it is that he has in his hand, but when he smacks it against Billy's head and it's like let her go, you piece of shit, I cheered so hard. He's like, come on, that's an action hero thing. Let's be real. And then later on, also when they're in the cabin and they're getting attacked by the mind flare, and it grabs Elle by the leg, that's when it bites her and starts pulling her out. Mike is the one that first reacts to go pull her back. You know, none of the others, like not even Nancy and Jonathan, actually react at that point until they see Mike running toward her, and then they all run, you know, to pull her back as well. But it's Mike. And I think it's great, because the thing with Mike is that I feel like he always has sort of like third-party PTSD. Like, he feels so bad for everything that happened to Will. To Will. Like, if Will had died, Mike would have been the one to take it the hardest. And then when he thought Elle was dead and he couldn't see her for an entire year, he was the one that was taking it the hardest. Like, I think Mike, because of all those things, whenever anything weird starts happening, like if Will starts telling him that he can still feel the mind flare, that's a bad thing. And then the mind flares coming to 11, that's a bad thing. And I think Mike sort of lives eternally paranoid, like permanently paranoid about something happened to either of them. And I loved that this season, even though he's not an action hero, even though he's just a kid and a nerdy kid at that, like even though he has no powers, even though there's really not much he can do, if he has to hit a bad guy in the head to get him to to leave Elle alone, he will do it. Even if it means that the bad guy will then turn to him. You know? And he does it because he loves Elle and he loves Will, and he just... I feel like he's that kind of guy. You know, like he has that heroic instinct in him. Like I would rather get in the way and put myself in danger than let this thing hurt my friends and the people I love again. But he's a kid, and he's a scrawny nerdy kid at that. So we hadn't seen that side of him really at that, like in previous seasons. Like I think the most that we saw was, you know, when the soldiers were pulling him back in season 1, he was like you'll have to like let her go and whatever, but he couldn't really do anything because they had him pinned back. He couldn't really do anything. And same at the end of the season when he tried to stop Elle from taking on the Demogorgon, but she wouldn't let him. And I think in season 2 he did a lot of like standing and staring. So I really like that in this season he decided, you know what, if I have to fight, like physically fight, I'm going to physically fight, because I'm not going to let this thing hurt my friends and the girl I love anymore. You know, and I think that's great. I think they've done a great job with Mike. I mean, there are moments where I just kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, child, what is going on when you're in your head with the whole, you know, Elle thing and the complaining. But I genuinely think when it turns into a trust thing, when people start telling him that he doesn't trust Elle, I don't fault him for that, because I don't think it's a trust thing. I just think he's got PTSD when it comes to Elle. He's paranoid about anything bad happening to her, and I think that's very understandable. And yeah, I mean, he does have to get over it a little bit, but I like that it gives him that instinct to fight, you know, and I think that's really great. So yeah, I could talk about Mike for an hour, so I'm not gonna do that. Let's go with 11. 11, I really liked her trajectory this entire season, because I mean, yeah, she starts off the season being with Mike and, you know, being a teenager and making out at every given opportunity, which is normal. But I like that her friendship with Max brings out this idea that she has to figure out who she is without anyone, not just dudes, but anyone telling her what she should be like. She has to figure out what she likes, how she wants to dress, and what she wants to think, and she has to define herself apart from her boyfriend. And I really do think that's a good lesson to be learned. I know, I guess as a Mike 11 shipper, I should be weirded out that they broke up. I honestly am not. I love that scene. It's like, I dump your ass. I love that. I freaking love that. I thought it was great. I knew it wasn't gonna last, so like I wasn't worried. I think back before season 3 was even, like, I think back when they were still filming and stuff, I commented somewhere that sure, they might break them up for a little bit, but I don't think they will like end the season with them broken up or anything. So that's truly what I thought, and I didn't mind them breaking up. I think it was necessary. I think Elle did need to find an identity of her own because she hasn't been around that many kids. She hasn't been around that many people, and she's sort of defined her life around Mike and around what Mike has taught her, which is not a bad thing, because I do think that Mike has her best interests at heart. But of course, she has to come to that conclusion on her own, and she hasn't. She hasn't had time yet to do that. So I rather like the fact that they broke up and that she got some time to actually define herself on her own way, you know, in her own way of thinking. And I really enjoyed that. And of course, I knew that in the end she was going to come back to Mike, because there is really something special about their relationship. They really do care about each other. But I am a true believer in that even when you're in a relationship, you have to be yourself. A relationship is really being two separate people together. You cannot define yourself in terms of someone else. And while Mike, had 12 years to grow up and decide who he wanted to be, Elle hasn't had that. And I think it was good. It was about time that she did that. And the whole theme of season 3 was growing up, and I really do think it worked well for Elle here. So I actually really liked the way that her arc went when it came to both Mike and just herself and her friendship with Max, and her relationship with Hopper, which was kind of hysterical because in the beginning she was just treating him like, here comes my annoying dad, and then Hopper dies at the end, and it's like, I'm sure now she's thinking, well, why didn't I appreciate what I had? You know what I mean? It's a really interesting just journey that she's gone through in this season, and I think it's great. Speaking of Hopper, a lot of people, I haven't really delved into the fan reaction. I haven't been reading fanfic or watching videos or anything after the season came out, precisely because I haven't had time, and I would much rather just watch the season. But I will get on it eventually, but little snippets of people's reaction have come my way through my Twitter timeline and just some comments that people made. I realize that there are people out there that hate what the season did with Hopper, and I can sort of see that. But at the same time, I don't think the season ruined Hopper like some people are complaining about. Like, I don't think he's totally ruined. I just think the funny thing about this season is that Hopper's arc is pretty much incomplete, and I think they did that on purpose. Because, and that's kind of the tragedy of it, they wanted Hopper's death to really have a very heavy meaning, and part of it was setting him up to learn all these lessons that he was supposed to learn, but we just didn't get to see him actually learn those lessons because he died. It was interrupted. There was a potential that was interrupted. Died, by the way. There was a potential there that was interrupted, and we never really got to see it. So I think we're meant to feel that way. Of course, because Hopper's not dead. Come on, guys, he's not dead. Because he's going to come back, we might eventually get to see those scenes that we should have gotten in this season. Like, we should have gotten more of him and Eleven coming to an agreement and a realization that the way they were reacting was because they cared about each other. We should have seen more of Mike and Hopper's relationship sort of warming up. We didn't get to see a lot of that. We should have seen more of him and Joyce actually coming together. We didn't get to see it. Like, we see like one scene with each, and in Mike's case it's barely even a scene. But that's by the nature of keeping them all separate for most of the season. So I think if Hopper hadn't died, we might have seen that. Like, in an epilogue, maybe we would have seen him learn those lessons that he has to let Elle, deal with her relationship on her own. As long as he's like vigilant, he can't. I mean, it's not like he's going to let her do anything she wants, but put boundaries in place and stuff. That he should have, treated Mike as less of a tyrant, and that he should have been less ridiculous about his attraction to Joyce. So, like, we would have seen all of that, but he died, and we didn't see it, and that's kind of the tragedy of it, really. But I do think that they like, the whole thing was set up so that he would learn those lessons, and all we get of that is his letter to Elle at the end. By that point he's dead, so we can't have scenes with him in them. So it feels a little bit like a cheat. I get it, I do get it. But I don't think they ruined Hopper. I think Hopper has always been very neurotic. I think Hopper has always been really quick to anger, and he keeps making these mistakes that he has to learn from. And I think they were hinting at us eventually seeing him learn those lessons. We just didn't get to. And because of the nature of them separating plot lines and keeping Hopper and Joyce away from everybody else for the longest freaking time, we just didn't get enough of that. But I think that's something that they can easily fix in season 4, especially given that Hopper coming back is going to be such an earth-shattering event for Ellen, for Joyce, and for everybody. I think they gave us hints that he was learning the lessons. Like I said, he does have that one scene with Elle at the mall, which was lovely. And then at the end of that scene, at the tail end, he sort of tells Mike to take care of her and to be careful. And you can sort of see how that's like you can see him sort of think about it and sigh before he tells him to be careful. And you can sort of imagine that that's sort of the olive branch that Mike had been hoping for, I guess. And of course there's the whole scene with Joyce where they actually agreed to go on a date, which was super sweet. But I don't think any of this was out of character for Hopper. Yes, some things he did kind of annoyed me. Like, he tells Elle to leave the door 3 inches open and then he spies on her. Which kind of, no, don't do that. I mean, it was funny, but probably don't do that, Hopper. And I did find it really annoying that every dude that Joyce spoke to, Hopper accused of being her boyfriend. That got to me, and it really annoyed me. But I don't think it's out of character for him, especially, since he was already sort of spurned by her standing him up. I think because we didn't get to see him resolve any of these issues, it feels like a bit of a cheat. But to me, that's part of the tragedy of him dying, and I don't mind it too much. I think people these days are kind of a little bit too eager to jump on the problematic aspects of a character and don't give enough weight to what happens when these characters learn the lesson and try to do better from that point on. And what happens with Hopper is that we didn't get enough of that, other side of things because he isn't there anymore. And that I can see how that might leave a few people with a sour taste in their mouths. Not me. I could see toward the end, even with those just few little scenes that we got toward the end, that he was turning the page, that he was understanding that he hadn't behaved in the best way possible, and that he needed to, take a chill pill, mostly. And of course, with his letter to Elle at the end, I think it sort of rounds up the whole thing. I really think he was understanding what was happening and coming to the realization that he had to do things differently. We just never got to see that actually happen because he died. But I hope that for season 4 that they bring these things back somehow, and we can actually see a good resolution for him. I still love Hopper. I think he's great. I think he was hilarious this season. A lot of people are complaining that he seemed to be sniping at Joyce the entire time. I thought it was funny. I thought it was part of the 80s charm, really. I mean, if you look back at so many of the 80s big shows, the whole bickering couple thing or bickering non-couple thing, I guess, because they weren't usually a couple but they became a couple later on. It was big in the 80s. It had its era in the 80s, so it made total sense to me that they would make Joyce and Hopper be sort of like that. Like I said, sometimes some things he did annoyed me, like the whole thing with him calling her out and having boyfriends. Like every time she spoke to a man, he's her boyfriend. I thought it was ridiculous. Like I could forgive the first time because he had just gotten stood up, but the second time with Alexei, that was just stupid. So I think there are things that they can do better with him. Like maybe they pushed it too far, but just the basic idea of the two of them bickering through the whole season, I don't find that bad. I think it's okay. I think it was funny. Same with his overprotectiveness of Elle. I've always thought, like, because when you read fanfiction and Mike and Eleven, you have different groups of people. Like you have one group of people that post season 2 thought that Hopper would be totally overprotective, like to the point that it became an unhealthy thing. Like they thought that he would hate Mike forever and never like always intimidate him, even up until the point where, you know, like he would have like a shotgun at his daughter's wedding or something like that. I never thought he would be that bad. But on the other side of things, you have this group of people who think that post season 2 everything was hunky-dory with Mike, which I also don't think is realistic for Hopper. I think he was going to be something in the middle, and I think that's sort of what we got. Like, he didn't know how to deal with it, with the relationship at the beginning. He made the worst possible decision in trying to break them up, and then after that he sort of realizes, you know what, maybe it's not so bad, I can give the kid a break, let's take it down a notch. You know, we just never got to see the last part. But I don't think him being all freaked out about Elle making out with Mike in her room is out of character for him. I really was expecting something like that. And obviously I expect that as the seasons go on and, you know, their relationship solidifies and he realizes that Mike is literally not going away, this is a thing that's going to be permanent, that he's going to come to really care for Mike too. And I think we've seen seeds of that in season 2. So I had no problem with Hopper this season, except for a few little things that I really didn't like when he did. But yeah, I like him. I have no problem with Hopper. I was fine with him. I don't think they ruined him. It's ridiculous. Let's not be over dramatic, guys. Like, I understand if you didn't like what they did with him in this season, but they can always bring him back and make it better for you guys, I guess. So I don't see any point in decrying him as being ruined forever. I liked him. Hopper's still one of my favorite characters, and I really enjoyed his arc this season, even if it was unfinished. As far as Joyce goes, I don't know. I like what they're doing with Joyce. It's funny because for the last 2 seasons, people have been clamoring for Joyce to have a motivation that doesn't involve a man, because people say that in the first season she was all about Will basically, and then in season 2 she was all about Will and then also Bob, which I think is fair. I do think it's fair to have her character not be defined by a male character. On the other hand, there are certain things where you can't go with Joyce. You know what I mean? Like, she has a minimum wage job, so it's not like you're gonna find her, I don't know, finding a job at some law firm or whatever. Like, there are limitations to her character just because of the way she was established and because of the opportunities that she has given the way she was established. So I think for those limitations that she has, what they did with her this season was really great. I like the idea that she noticed that something was wrong. Even if it's something as stupid as magnets falling off her fridge, she noticed that something was wrong and she was going to figure it out if it was the last thing she did. And that had nothing whatsoever to do with a dude. I mean, yeah, eventually, obviously, it all goes back to the fact that she doesn't want the government to come back for Will or anything, but she wasn't really thinking about Will at this point. When she started digging, she wanted to know what was going on because she thought something strange was going on, and she didn't want the lab to come back. And I really enjoyed that. It's one of those annoying things that Hopper did was not listen to Joyce, because I'm like, after 2 seasons we have established that you should always listen to Joyce because she's always fucking right. You know, about shit. She's always right. So don't doubt Joyce when she tells you something, no matter how ridiculous and crazy it sounds. So I really loved what they did with Joyce, and it was almost similar to what they did with Nancy, in a way that she had a goal in mind and she was not going to let anything get in her way. Like, even if she had to do it herself, even if she had to figure out the whole thing by herself without Hopper, she was going to do it. And I really love that. I just love how smart she is. Like, it's something so stupid, like magnets. It's so dumb, but immediately her alarm bells go off. It's like, this is something weird. Weird shit shouldn't be happening in Hawkins anymore. What is this about? You know, and she's so smart and she's so determined, and I loved what they did with her this season. I also hate that she can't be happy. Like, God, the first time around she got her son back, but he wasn't okay. And then the second time around, her boyfriend got eaten by demo dogs. And now she was starting to have something with Hopper, and he, of course, died. And she had to move Hawkins. I mean, I think it's super smart of her, because honestly, I would have moved like a whole season ago. But but still, like, it feels like she can never catch a break. But I don't know. Hopefully, wherever she is after this, wherever she moves to, she'll be thriving. Hopefully. We'll see. I don't know. I don't think that's in the cards for her, honestly, because I don't know. I think that the things that are going wrong in her life are sort of what motivates her to do stuff. So obviously something is going to happen that's going to either drive her back to Hawkins or drive her back into the mythology arc somehow, even if she's away from Hawkins. But I don't know, I really loved Joyce this season. She was so determined, like, truly an icon. Something like, I want to be like her when I grow up. She's so great. Speaking of Will, though, I like that he got a bit of a break this time around. I mean, there was still the whole, I thought that was super cool, by the way, the tingles, the Will tingles that he was getting. I love, like, all I wanted since season 1 for Will is for him to gain some sort of superpower, and if he can somehow get that spidey sense, like, of him being able to tell when something upside downy is going on, I think that's good enough. Like, I don't want him to be an L, because I want L to be L. Like, I want the fact that it's like a girl who is the most powerful character in this whole show is great. So I don't want him to take that away from her, but I want him to have some kind of superpower. And I think the Will tingles is good enough for me. I do hope it keeps going, like it keeps evolving somehow later on, like maybe he can fine-tune that or something in the future. But yeah, I really enjoyed that Will finally got to catch a break this time around, even though he was still pretty scared. At least nothing was happening directly to him. I also really liked his conflict this season. I had said since before, when the first trailer came out, that it seemed like Will was going to be the one who was actually feeling left out, and I had that right. I really like that though, because I mean, how do I say this? He didn't really get to participate much of all the upside downy things that happened the last time. I mean, yeah, he was in the middle of it all, but he was apart from the rest of the characters most of the time. Like, season 1, he was trapped in the upside down. Season 2, he was unconscious for a lot of it. So I think it has affected him differently than his friends, whereas it caused all his friends to sort of mature really quickly. For Will, it was more like, I want to stay in the safety of the things that I know. And I think that's why this whole thing came about right now. I also did like again, they have hinted in the past, but it was a little bit more, less of a hint and more of an anvil this time around, that Will might be gay, or maybe just, I don't know, I'm thinking he might be gay, or he might be asexual or aromantic or something, which would be fine too. He does tell Joyce that he's not going to fall in love, which I thought was interesting. But Mike does yell at him at one point, well, it's not my fault you don't like girls. So it's sort of a hint that maybe there's something different about Will in those terms. And I feel that's great, because you can see how that also affects him in his relationship with his friends, and wanting to, go back and do the things they used to do when they were kids, because he doesn't want to change. If he is gay, he has a lot to lose by admitting that, even to himself. The 80s were not a good time for gay people. And you can see how he's afraid of what that might mean. He's afraid of admitting it to himself, let alone everyone else. And because of that, he's afraid of change, basically. So he goes back to a time where he didn't have to think about any of this, and it makes a lot of sense. I do hope the Duffer Brothers are going somewhere with this. Like I said, because we do have an LGBT character, like an official LGBT character in Robin. It might be that they don't make Will actually gay, but they make him asexual or aromantic or whatnot, which I think would be interesting. But I don't know if it would be that clear, because being asexual and aromantic wasn't really a label back in the 80s. I mean, yes, there were people who were like that, but they didn't label themselves asexual and aromantic, so it might be a little bit vague, I guess, if they go that way. Whereas if Will ends up being gay, then they can actually say he's gay at some point. Whatever it ends up being, I just hope the Duffers are going somewhere with this, because they've been hinting at this for a long time. And I mean, it feels better this season, given that we have one character in Robin who is actually officially a lesbian. So it doesn't feel like they're dodging it like on purpose. But I really do want them to go somewhere with this, because they've been hinting at it for a while, and I want them to go somewhere with this. I know that Finn Wolfhard has said that they actually filmed different versions of that scene. Like, at one point he said, instead of saying, "It's not my fault you don't like girls," he said, "It's not my fault you don't like girls yet." But I think if the Duffers decided to go with that one, it means something, and I hope they're going somewhere with this. Let's talk about Max, because I thought Max was awesome. I love Max. I love her so much. I loved her since season 2, but this season she was just so much, like, I loved her so much more. She was fun. We got to see the fun side of her, not just the angry weirded out, like unassimilating side of her, I guess. But we got to see the fun side of her. We got to see her interact with Eleven, which I loved. I loved them so much. And she was just, it was great to see her interacting with the party in a way that was non-belligerent, I guess. It's like she's part of the party now. It's great. Nobody doubts it. She has a spot in the party now. And I just, there's one thing about this season that I really enjoyed, and it's that every character got their little moment. You know, like even if Max wasn't really driving the plot, like she wasn't moving things along like 11, she wasn't thinking of plans like Mike, but she had her little moments, like the moment at Bradley's big buy when Nancy's about to like pour disinfectant on 11's wound, and then she's like, it's not like that, you do it this way, trust me, I skateboard, I know this stuff. I thought that was great because it just shows how smart she is, how smart she can be, and I love that she encouraged 11 to like really go for it. I love that she dumped Lucas like 5 times. I thought that was great. I really liked her interactions with Billy, mostly because even though I still feel like they don't get along, you know, and she probably wasn't really close to him, but he's still her brother, you know, and I think even if you don't get along with someone, if they're a part of your family, you're gonna feel that. So, and she's a good person, so even if Billy wasn't the best brother to her, she still wanted him to be okay. So I liked that she actually, you know, felt that she had to help Billy. And you could always see that emotion in her, and I really enjoyed that. Speaking of Max, and let's go to Lucas now. Again, much like Max, Lucas didn't really get a whole lot to do this season other than be, you know, a soundboard, I guess, for Mike, as much as Max was one for 11. But he did have his moments. Again, you know, he had the moment with the fireworks, which was a really smart idea, and there's a Stranger Things podcast now where they talk about behind the scenes stuff, which is really great, by the way. Look it up if you haven't subscribed yet. But they mentioned at some point that the original idea was for them to like fill a whole car with fireworks and then have like ram that car into the spider monster and have it explode everywhere. Which would have been awesome. I think I would have liked that ending better. But I like the idea that it was Lucas who came up with that thing. Like, just the idea of using fireworks against the Mind Flayer, I thought was kind of genius. And you know, the slingshot actually worked, which was nice, because in previous seasons it just hasn't done anything. This time it worked. Not once, but twice. It actually worked twice. So, yay Lucas, go! As far as Dustin goes, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I had a lot of gripes with Dustin the previous season. I think I mentioned it in my review. I had a lot of gripes with the way he behaved with respect to Dart the last season. And just the way he behaved in general felt a little bit like more, I don't know, harsh for some reason. Like he was mad at everybody. And this season I felt a lot better about him. He felt, yeah, I mean, he was still a little beefing with his friends about the whole Susie thing and feeling like they were leaving him behind and stuff. But that didn't last long, and then when he got together with Steve and Robin and eventually Erica, it felt like he was being a lot more supportive. I feel like I liked Dustin a lot this season. Like I liked how he was trying to set Steve and Robin together, even though that went nowhere and I don't want it to go anywhere. It felt like he was being supportive. It felt like he was being positive. It felt like he was being proactive. Like he found this Russian communication and he decided, I need to help save my country. You know, that's a very, very Spielbergian type of thing. Maybe not necessarily about the country itself, but like, I need to go out by myself and be a hero. Not by myself, with other people, but like, we need to go and do something about this. It's not like I can just submit that to the government and let them handle it. I'm going to do something about it myself. And I really liked that. And I felt like he was being so much more positive this season. I really liked that. I mean, he offered to die for Steve. Like, if Steve died, I would die. 2, he tried to convince Erica to help them. Like, I felt like he was being so much more positive, and it felt a lot more like Dustin season 1 to me, and I really loved that. As far as Steve goes, I've had my, whole arc with Steve. Initially in season 1, I didn't like him. Not really. Like, even at the end of season 1, I'm like, yes, yeah, whatever, it's Steve. Season 2 made me really love him, Season 3 was great. Like, Steve is one of those people that just based on charisma alone draws you in. Like, Joe Keery is just so charismatic. And even though Steve is like down in the dumps the entire time, he's working at an ice cream parlor, even though he should be like going to university and stuff, he just draws you in. He has that charm about him. And initially I wasn't into it in the first season, but as time goes on, I just love him more and more. Again, one of those things where the characters get their little moments. Even Steve, like, he figures out the song, and he figures out that the transmission is coming from Starcourt Mall, and you get to see that he's not just this dumb dude with a bag full of nails and great hair. He actually is smart in his own way, even though he barely graduated high school. But I think, I don't know, I really like Steve. I don't think this season necessarily did much to like help me, like add to how I already loved him. Steve is he's not one of my favorite characters, but I really do like him. But yeah, I mean, he was great this season. I really enjoyed his arc with respect to Robin, from like being in denial about all the things that make a person cool, and still being in that high school mentality where cliques are this huge thing and popularity is this huge thing, and him evolving to realizing that Robin is actually pretty cool, and maybe they could have something there. And of course it goes nowhere, but I think it's a great show of growth for him, and I really like it.
This video ran a little too long. Stay tuned to talks from Freaking Narnia for the second half, coming soon.